Hi, wonderful listeners. Welcome to Voices of Change. I'm your host, Celeste Imbo, and we are back again with another episode. Today, I'm going to be speaking to Kayode Akintola, who is the head of Region Africa at CAFOD. Hi, Kayode.
Hi, Celeste.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
We are so happy to have you with us today, and we're obviously going to go into a really cool conversation with you, and hope you're ready.
Yes, I am, and thank you for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. So to get us started, we're going to have a quick fire round. So I'm just going to ask you these questions. First thing that comes to your mind is perfect. So, who is a saint that inspires you and why?
So the saint that inspires me is Saint Francis of Assisi. And the reason why he inspires me so much is because of his ministry to the poor, the underprivileged, but also around creation, the love for creation and for animals. And I mean, he epitomizes everything that I think the gospel of Jesus talks about in terms of if you must follow Jesus, you must leave everything behind to follow him. And here was a man who came from an affluent home and deciding to strip himself of everything in order to be with the poor, but also to just be with creation and all the work that he did around the love for nature, for animals, but also his work around the interreligious dialogue. So he really inspires me quite a lot.
Yeah, he's a great saint. I love seeing the portraits of him surrounded with the animals and everything. He's a great saint. If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Ooh, pounded yam. So I don't know. So it's a delicacy from the part of the country where I come from in Nigeria. So it's yam really pounded in mortar using pestle. And it would go with any kind of soup, would just be absolutely fine.
And yam, so I know what a yam is, but in case some people haven't seen one, what does it look like? Because it's kind of like, you might compare it to a potato or something, but it's not really.
It's a root tuber. Don't understand measurement, so I will hesitate not to use measurement. But it's a root tuber, but it's quite more than bigger than potato. And you just slice it and boil, and then once it's boiled, then you put it in a mortar. We call it mortar, and then there's a pestle, and you just literally pound and make it. I don't know how many people, again, I don't want to use how many people will know fufu, or if you go to ugali in the East Africa, it's not the same, but I'm just trying to say it would just be very similar.
Yeah. So what kind of stew or soup do you particularly like to have it with?
Egusi or vegetable. Well,
yeah.
Egusi, I'm sure for the English listeners, is melon.
Yeah, melon seed or something.
Yeah,
like
melon
this.
seed,
yeah. Yeah, very tasty. I know, I've had it before, it's very tasty.
Okay.
It's a good choice. Is there one thing that you've always wanted to learn, but you've never had the time to do it?
There's one thing I've always wanted to learn, but it's not about not having, I don't think it's only about not having time to learn, and that is French language.
Okay.
I mean, I have always wanted to learn French language now for close to 20 years, but a combination of time, but a combination of, I don't know whether I'm just lazy myself, because I have enrolled in about 2 separate classes, and I just find way too complex for me to grab. And maybe I was just impatient, wanting to just learn and start speaking French in 2-3 months. And so many times I just drop out, and it's still something I still think maybe one day I would go back to find the space and the patience to learn French language.
Well, it sounds like you've got the passion to learn it, so I'm sure you're going to be able to start it again. 3rd time lucky, maybe.
Okay, hopefully.
So apart from that is like one ambition of yours to learn French, do you have any sort of other hobbies? How do you like to unwind?
I mean, for me, in terms of time to unwind, I love time spent with my family. And so I've got a family of two girls and my wife. So it's the biggest way for me that I just kind of unwind, just having time with them to either go out, depending on where we are all together at the same time, either going to the beach or having a walk together as a family. It's just, or watching movies together in the house. Is just time for me to just relax. Very disappointingly, I don't follow any club. So for those who might be hoping I would mention, either I follow a football club as a way of unwinding, but for me, it's more family.
More family time. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for telling us. I feel like we've got to know you a little bit more.
Thank you.
So could you tell us a little bit about your journey in CAFOD? How did you get involved and get started with CAFOD?
I joined CAFOD in 2013. So July 2013 was when I joined CAFOD as initially as country representative for Sierra Leone and Liberia. Before then, I really don't know so much about CAFOD, other than the fact that when I was living and working in Nigeria for another organization, another international organization, I've only met a CAFOD representative in one of the meetings, but then just didn't know so much about it. And then in 2013, and there was this advert run for country representative for Sierra Leone and Liberia. I'm reading it, and then I decided to just go to the website. And I thought, okay. Two things for me. The role was quite exciting for me. But also there was the angle of them when I went to the website to read, just bringing the faith elements into the work that I do was another thing that then interested me to want to work for CAFOD. And then I applied, and that's how the journey with CAFOD started in 2013. And it's been great working for CAFOD.
And so that's an amazing story to hear. But now you've moved on, and now you're actually the head of Region Africa. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about that? When did you get that position?
So I started this position 1st of October 2022. So just a little under 2 years in that role as well now. And I felt, and it couldn't have come at the right time than now, actually, when Africa itself is confronted by quite a lot of challenges. And I think it's great that CAFOD as an organization, one of the many organizations that will allow an African to be able to lead its African agenda as well.
Do you find that's very important?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important because I'm an African. I was born, raised, lived all my life in Africa. So, I mean, I understand the context. I understand the people, and I am part of the circumstances and all the issues in Africa. So, quite feel very privileged to be in this role, and I think I am excited that in my little way I am contributing to shape the agenda in Africa.
And I think that's really interesting because, you know, we say like representation matters, it's important for people to have a seat at the table, you know, and so it kind of shows when you have people who come from a particular country or particular continent are actually decision makers. That does make a difference, hopefully, in making a better world.
Yeah, it does. Certainly it does. And I think CAFOD is one of the leading organizations within the spheres of international organizations where CAFOD is allowing quite a number of nationals within countries, within continents to be able to lead their programming in those countries or within the continent.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on what it means for CAFOD to work with local experts and why working together is so important?
So I think one thing that is important to mention is the fact that CAFOD is part of the largest aid network in the world itself. And because of our global reach and then our local presence, together we have the potential to be able to reach a large number of people, particularly people who you might want, or people that are considered difficult to reach people. And we do this both in Africa, in Asia, Middle East, and in the Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, for me, the reason why it is, why that whole way of working is quite important for CAFOD is simply because the partners that we work with are always based in the communities, in those remote areas, because they're part of the church, the wider church network. So they're quite very rooted in those communities. They are trusted by those communities, but they also, because they are part of the communities, they understand the issues, the needs of those communities. And so you discover that because they are trusted, they are part of the community, they understand the issues, they have the trust of the communities, then you could just see from our partners that there is a lot of commitment, a lot of passion, as well as a lot of knowledge that they bring to the table. And who else could be best placed to address issues than people who actually live the realities of the issues every day themselves?
I think that's a really interesting point. The people that live these issues every day surely would know more than people who are, hundreds of thousands of miles away about really how to sort out a problem. So I think that's really interesting. Earlier this year, it was actually reported that all 10 of the most underreported humanitarian crises of 2023 are in Africa for a second year running. Why do you think they're receiving less attention than, say, the other crises that are happening around the world last year?
Good question. I think there are several and multiple factors that is responsible for why Africa is being neglected in the media coverage around around the realities of what is happening within the continent. And I'm just going to mention a few of some of those issues. You would find from DRC to Zimbabwe to Nigeria to Sudan to Angola, just where almost everywhere in Africa there is either conflict, or there is maybe hunger, or there is climate change issues affecting our countries. And what you find is that they get less media airtime compared to other parts of the world. And I will use example with due sense of respect to those communities as well. The issue in Gaza has far outweighed, gotten more attention than what is happening, for example, in Sudan. And the same thing in Ukraine. But you see, what is happening is some of the issues that also happen in Africa, or some of the conflicts in Africa, are being fueled by international politics. And because they are also being fueled by international politics, there is also an attempt not to allow those things to come to the media forefront, because then when they come to the media forefront, then there are going to be challenging questions to be asked. Because I have been in conversation with people to say, Sudan is 1 year into the conflict. Sudan does not have an arm industry. So where is the weapon? Where are the arms coming from? So who is bringing the arm? Who is selling these arms to the two factions that are using this and have brought a lot of calamities to the life of people, particularly women, children, and the elderly? So there is that aspect of international politics. But there is also the reality of the fact that who controls the media? Because again, media globally is being controlled by the West, by the well-developed countries. The BBC, the CNN, the Sky News of this world. They are the ones that control the media, they influence, and they shape what they think the world should know about or what the world should hear about. And they've got quite a lot of interest behind them, either in terms of government or in terms of business people who in themselves at times just profit from some of this conflict. So there is also that element itself. But there's also the element of even the African media in themselves not reporting what is happening in the continent. And part of the reasons why you find the African media themselves not reporting what is happening in the continent is you will find that they tend to be driven by where the international medias just pitch their stories. And you will find during the Ukraine-Russia invasion of Ukraine, you find a lot of African media really projecting that, either by linking with some of these international media to project it and show it in the continent. But when it comes to the continent issues themselves, they also don't project, because again, there is the media bias, both by the African media, but even by the more global media. There is a bias because some of the media in Africa are owned by governments. And if they are owned by government and government itself is part of the conflict, is unlikely to want to project what they are part of a problem of. Yeah. So that's why I'm saying that it's quite a web of different factors building on one another. But I think Africa has been neglected for too long. And I think what this is going to leave is going to become a moral burden on the entire world, because Africa is part of the global community. Yeah. And so it cannot be neglected. What affects Africa would have a ramification for the rest of the world. Sudan, as an example, it's either the world rises up to Sudan, or Sudan is going to become a regional conflict that then nobody then knows what's the implication of a regional conflict. The wider implication of what that will mean for the entire world, nobody is sure about that. So the issue of not getting media attention, it's just several factors.
And I think you've really explained that, actually, which makes me think about that. You've got the local media and the government who may control certain types of media within countries, and then you've got the international news that everybody's watching. And of course, yes, there's going to be some sort of, factors around why they choose certain stories and other stories. Do you think then that's why it's important for stories of other conflicts and other issues that are happening in the world to come out from other sources? For example, an organization like CAFOD or something like that is not aligned to a government or anything like that, that can actually are in the space to actually raise the voice of actually what's happening. Yeah.
No, I think CAFOD is doing actively well in terms of trying to use other means of getting some of these messages, including using social media, because we know that at least for social media, it's currently not being censored in this part of the world, in the UK, and so. It's great that CAFOD is using all the different other means apart from the mainstream media but also trying to see how they get the mainstream media to be able to come in and tell the stories of this, what you will call forgotten crisis within Africa. So yeah, it's really great. But what you find is that because of all this neglect, what it tends to do is it brings about, it's also partly what is responsible for the lack of funding that is needed to support the response work in Africa, because then the public are not made aware. CAFOD recently conducted a survey of trying to find out UK public awareness of Sudan as the worst humanitarian crisis in terms of internally displaced persons in the world today. And it is eye-opening to discover that less than 10% or thereabout, quite a very small percentage of people are really aware of this fact.
Wow.
And the reason is simply because the media choose to project what they want to project and keep silence about Sudan.
And that's really sad. That is really sad to think that there's things happening, you know, out there in the world that many people will never hear of because the media is not showing it and it's focused in just one area or two areas, depending on their news cycle. You mentioned Sudan, obviously, a lot, and you mentioned it as, I guess, the worst crisis. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? What is the issues? What are the challenges that are being faced in Sudan? You mentioned the displaced people as well. So what's happening there?
Yeah, I think Sudan, as it stands today, has the world's largest internally displaced persons in the world. And this is a country itself that before this conflict broke out, April 2023, was having a large number of refugees, both from Ethiopia, but also from South Sudan. And then now with this whole conflict, it has become it's almost becoming a catastrophic situation, because what the statistics is showing now is the fact that because of the conflict and also because of climate change issues as well, last year was they had a failed harvest. So there is now a growing food insecurity. And the rainy season is due to start in about a couple of weeks' time.
Okay.
And if the world does not get all the necessary support out to Sudan, then we may be facing a catastrophic situation. The people are in need of aid. Parents now are having to just, particularly mothers, as you always know, are having now to go without food so that their children and their family can just have some basic things. You are now having situations where roots and herbs that people naturally do not even take for food is what people are having to take now as a means of just staying alive for the moment. So the situation in Sudan, it's quite bad. There is lack of water, but there is also lack of access to food by people who have been displaced by this conflict. And so while over 9 million people are currently facing their humanitarian need in Sudan.
Over 9 million people?
Yeah, facing food insecurity. But well more than, almost about half of the population, about 25 million, are already internally displaced. So people have left their home without shelters, without their belongings. So people are literally living every hour as they come.
Where are they going? Where are they trying to get to?
So there are people who have left the country. There are now refugees in South Sudan, well over 500,000 population in Sudan. There is also a large number of refugees also in Chad. There is another set of refugees in Egypt. I don't know if you know the map of Sudan. I think Sudan has shared boundaries with almost about 8 countries. And so what you find is people are literally trying to move into wherever, because when conflict comes, all that people tried to do is to flee. And they tried to flee to wherever they would find safety. It's either people are fleeing to other, and there are many people who are also fleeing to other parts of the country within Sudan. Those are the ones that I refer to as internally displaced persons. But there are those who have actually fled out of the country for safety, who have now become refugees in some of the neighboring countries. And some of these neighboring countries where they have gone to seek safety and cover are in themselves facing challenges of their own. So, and that's why I'm saying that it's either as a world we rise up to this challenge and save not just Sudan, but save the world, because rising up to help Sudan is actually rising up to help humanity and to save the world. And if we don't, then we are actually sitting on a potential regional conflict that will have a wider ramification for the continent of Africa. But I think Europe needs to know that it's not going to be immune out of the crisis if this crisis snowballs beyond just Sudan.
And I think that point is very important because, as you said, there are even conflicts and crises in surrounding countries, even South Sudan. And you said the people had left there to Sudan looking for refugee, like sort of availability for them. But now this has started in Sudan over a year ago. So now they're also in trouble too.
Yeah.
And so it seems everyone is like trying to get away from it, go to another country. But then now those countries are not necessarily able to cope, to manage. And if the rest of the world doesn't know that this is happening, as you said, then this means that the conflicts can just spread out even further. Nobody knows what's happening. No one can help. There's no sort of impetus to kind of support some kind of bringing a ceasefire or bringing the two sides to the table. So it sounds pretty disastrous.
It is. I bet you we can sit here and say it sounds disastrous, but I tell you, it is a looming catastrophe that the world is about to experience.
What would you say would be the most important thing that needs to happen right now?
I think the most important thing that needs to happen right now is to provide the funding. I mean, it's grateful to the nations of the world who donated to the Paris Pledging Conference, but it's short of what is needed. It's quite below what is needed to respond to the issue in Sudan. So this is an extraordinary situation, and it therefore calls for nations of the world to go the extra miles of maybe call it dig deep into their resources to support Sudan, knowing fully well that a support to Sudan, it's a support to the continent, to the world itself. Beyond just those, and I would say this very clearly, it's not just only enough to provide resources, to pledge and bring those resources, but we need to ensure that those resources are getting to the real local partners, to the partners who are really on ground, who have been responding even before the world came to support, that we tried to get these resources as much as possible to these local partners, and that this is not about time also, that those resources are getting into the big organizations who then just fly in and fly out, but it's about time to get the resources down to the local communities and to the people themselves. And that resources is important to provide food, to provide water, and to provide medications, hygiene, sanitations, and all the needs that people have. And I mean, because the resources that has been pledged has fallen short as well, is also partly the reason why CAFOD itself had launched the Sudan appeal of trying to really call and mobilize for resources at the level of CAFOD that we can be able to deploy to our local partners who are based in those communities, who have remained there all through this conflict, and who are responding in their little way that if we get these resources that we have launched through this appeal, we might be able to get it down to those local partners to be able to help the people of Sudan.
And you mentioned the Paris Pledge. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that? Was the UK part of that pledge?
Yeah, the UK government was part of the pledge. I think the UK government, if I'm correct, pledged, I think, about 89 million pounds, thereabout. And this is for a pledge that, this is for an appeal that requires well over $3 billion. So. Wow. It's quite, it's appreciated. I don't want to sound as if it's not appreciated, but it needs more.
Yeah, it sounds tiny compared to what you're saying. It really needs in the billions. We're not even in the millions, we're in the billions.
Yeah.
And so does that mean that, so the future of that pledge, you feel that it should just actually be with like upheld properly, or they go further? Or would you like to see another pledge happening?
I think it's for nations to just go further. I would say they just go further to increase the pledge that they have made, but not just only increase those pledge, turn those pledge into commitment and turn them into commitment now that the people of Sudan actually needs it. There is no value if those pledges are turned into commitment 6 months from now or 1 year, when the crisis is completely then maybe out of control. And that's why for us as an organization, we cannot wait for these pledges, for when nations of the world will make these pledges a reality, or maybe put more into those pledges. And that's why even for me, I would continue to appeal to our volunteers, to our supporters, to the people of goodwill of this world to please donate to the CAFOD appeal for Sudan, so that we might be able to save lives, and we might at the end of the day be able to say, well, out of our moral conscience, we did our best, because the worst thing that could happen is for the world to end up with a moral burden on its heart and said, we didn't rise up when we needed to rise up. Yeah. And I hope Sudan does not get to that situation.
Because it's not the first time that that's happened, isn't it, in the world? There's always been, oh, we wish that we got involved earlier, you know, it's got to this point. We don't want to get to that point. No. We want to act now while we can. Yeah. And there must be a lot of other sort of situations within the continent of Africa that are just so incredibly difficult and painful. Could you tell us a little bit more about any other countries that are suffering either from conflict or climate change, for example, that you've worked in?
Again, I don't know how much the world again is aware. In the last, I think in the last 3 weeks, if not more now, there have been flooding in East Africa.
In East Africa, okay.
Yeah, in Kenya.
In Kenya.
But not so much is being talked about. Again, over 300 people, according to government statistics, have lost their life. This is me now. When government tells you 300, I'm afraid that number is actually much more than that. But take it on the face value that that's actually the true number. I mean, every soul is an important soul. And as creations of God, we were not supposed to watch why souls are perishing if there's anything we can do. So the Kenyan flooding is there. We can see Zimbabwe now have declared a national emergency on food insecurity because there is a drought and a failed harvest. You go to DRC, the situation in DRC is, goodness, it's completely unacceptable. And this is simply because there is an international conspiracy that is benefiting also from the conflict in DRC. That has been going on for decades now. You go to Angola, you go to Burkina Faso, you go to Nigeria in the northeast, and now spilling into the northwest, you continue to have this conflict. You have Cameroon. A part of Cameroon have been at war with the rest of the country. And now even Nigeria with its own around the Northeast Africa, where CAFOD is responding, for example, because of the Boko Haram insurgency. You're also having influx of refugees who are fleeing the conflict in Cameroon into northeast Nigeria.
Wow.
And what you will find is, and there are climate change impacts already in the northeast, because the desert is encroaching a lot already. So what you're going to find is there is an existing conflict in the country. There are now influx of refugees coming in now to also seek for support, seek for safety and help. And now you have a community that is already in conflict.
Yeah.
And because of that, resources, infrastructures are being damaged and destroyed. Climate change is then making natural resources that people have access to before, either for means of livelihood or even for access, becoming quite limited. There is going to be more struggle between the people in themselves within the country, but also with refugees now who are coming in, who are also now having to struggle with already quite a very limited resources. So it's a cycle of complex issues that is actually facing the world and facing Nigeria as well, and Cameroon. So all of these different countries talk about the Central African Republic. So almost everywhere, and then Ethiopia, we know the Tigray war.
Yeah.
It's still not over. It's still ongoing. Often and now and often you hear about conflict. So there's just quite a lot that is going on. Either it's as a result of drought, climate change, conflict, violence, flood, just name it.
And I think you made the connection there, particularly about the climate change, that it's so common, how it's affecting droughts, lack of harvest, all this type of stuff being affected by climate change in so many different countries. And I think that's something people who are listening probably are going to be thinking about, that this is really quite serious. And maybe some people don't take it seriously, but it can now lead to other things. It leads to people having to move from where they live, and then you get other people moving in, and then it can cause conflict between people. So yeah, it's pretty serious, that one. But despite all of these challenges and what you've explained like today to us, what still gives you hope to do what you do? As well as these stories, I'm sure you probably have met lots of really wonderful, uplifting people who've inspired you. We'd love to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could see I took a deep breath.
That was a deep breath, yes.
I mean, despite the despondency that seems to underpin African issues, I think the continent remains a place of opportunity. And I would say this, a place of opportunity, one that is occupied today by young, vibrant population, okay? And this very young, vibrant, young population have not resigned themselves to the narratives about African feeling. Because I know that there is broader statement that is going on, African is going to be a failed continent, blah, blah, blah. But the truth of it is, for me, what I see is I see a huge opportunity and a hope, because there is a huge, young, growing Africans who do not accept that narrative. And I think because it is probably the fastest growing population in the world of where you have young people, that for me gives me a hope, because it tends to show that African young people, African youths are ready to engage. And that's why for us as CAFOD, within the African region, apart from women and girls, young people are the other population that we have a focus around in terms of the work that we do, because we know that the energy and the strength and the vibrancy that young people bring, it's a huge opportunity and a hope for Africa in the future. But also to mention that in the midst of all of these conflicts, climate change, violence, and all of that, is that Africans are quite very resilient people. Resilience in the fact that we're very resilient and we are people of faith. And so you would find in the midst of all the challenges, people will still tell you they can see a bright light. You may be from outside and feeling a sense of hopelessness. They will tell you, it will be fine. They may not know how and when it will be, but we are people that are quite very hopeful that the future has a bright light at the end of the tunnel. But I think also it's important to say that the work that CAFOD and other likes organizations, excuse me, have been doing over the years is making a change. Because I think it's important to recognize that it's not all sad and doom, but that the work that we do as an organizations with our local partners and other organizations are also doing is really bringing about change in the life of people and making people to feel a sense of there is a bright light. So that for me is what gives me hope for the future, and that's what keeps me going, to know that I'm still within the right sector that I should be. Because I mean, when you go and visit communities and you see how communities are so appreciative, communities who don't have water, who have lived. I have been in a community that have lived over 100 years and have never seen a clean water.
Whoa, where was that?
In Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone, wow.
Yes. And so with CAFOD support, a borehole was drilled in this community. And just one borehole, you would think. And it led to a whole community celebration.
Wow.
Because this is more like life. Because when you look at the water that the people were drinking, oh goodness me, I just don't know how they have lived and survived over the years. And it underscores the value of when CAFOD works with partners again, because we didn't know about that community as CAFOD. It was because the partners that we work with know about the communities because they live within the communities and understand those communities and have built trust. To actually get a borehole into that community, we had to team up with the community to make what we call a makeshift bridge for the vehicle that was coming to drill the borehole to be able to have access.
Oh, so you start off with a bridge because you couldn't get across.
The vehicle couldn't get across to drill for water. And that for me underscores the fact that nobody is out of the reach and the love of God, and nobody should be. And we as people, and that's why Saint Francis Assisi for me continues to reflect that sainthood that inspires me a lot because of his work and his ministry with the poor and the underprivileged, and always them with them and around them every time. So Africa is not a continent of hopelessness. It is actually a continent of opportunities and a continent of hope. And I think our young people really reflects that opportunity and hope for the future.
Thank you so much, Kayode. Thank you. This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like you've left us on a very hopeful and positive note, that Africa is full of potential, is full of opportunity. The young people are amazing, and they're just going to be, I guess, the light of the future. I know there's challenges. You've explained to us the challenges, but you've explained to us the successes, you know, from bringing the boreholes in certain countries so they can actually have fresh, clean water. It's amazing that these things can happen. So it does show that good things are happening in the world as well.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Celestia, and it's a pleasure. Again.
And that concludes another episode of Voices of Change. We were speaking to Kayode Akintola. We had an amazing conversation. I hope it really inspired you also to find out a little bit more about what's happening, particularly in Sudan, because as we've found out today, it's not always covered really in the news cycles that we listen to. To all our listeners, stay tuned for more of our thought-provoking conversations with more guests coming on over the next few months. Don't forget to follow, like, and share our podcast as well. And all that's left for me to say is goodbye and see you soon.